Microsoft Build is coming to Seattle May 19th through the 22nd, and I will be there, the GitHub team will be there, and we're bringing the goods. We're gonna feature the Copilot prize wheel, we have surprise product demos, and we'll be bringing this ultimate vibe coding keyboard. Oh, that's what that is. So that is the button for the prize wheel. Okay. This conference is gonna shape up to be a perfect mix of learning and fun with plenty of opportunities for you to talk to GitHubbers as well as watch live demos and explore the latest in developer tools and technologies. I hope to see you there. Mark your calendars. This is one dev conference you don't wanna miss. Welcome to this special edition of Open Source Fridays. Today, we are doubling up on shows because it's a very special month. It's Maintainer Month, but it's also the week of a very special day, Global Accessibility Awareness Day, or GAAD. And I am absolutely humble and thrilled to be joined by two incredible people in this space. One of them, Joe Devon, who's actually a tech entrepreneur and visionary and the co-founder of the Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Thank you for being here, Joe. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Andrea.
And then we have Ed Summers, a blind developer and head of accessibility at GitHub. And you have done such incredible work. Amazing that I get to actually talk to you in this context. And on the heels of such a great announcement. Welcome, Ed. Thank you for taking the time.
Oh, I can't take credit for any of the progress from GitHub because working on accessibility at GitHub and leading this program is a lot like pushing a rock down a hill. Sometimes you have to run to catch up with it because it just gets away from you and goes so fast. It's just great. So thank you very much for your kind words.
That's amazing. That makes me feel really good about our company. I love that. Thank you for sharing. Joe, I want to touch on a bit of a history of what Global Accessibility Awareness Day is for those of you who are joining and you have no idea what this is. And we're going to talk about why it matters to every single developer who's watching this stream today. So, Joe, I'd love to start with you because you've been doing this for a bit now. Can you give us, oh my goodness, can you give us a bit of background as to how did GAAD begin?
Yeah, I was actually a web developer at the time. I was working on AmericanIdol.com, and we did have a contestant who was blind. And I always, in the back of my mind, wondered, were we doing the right thing in terms of our video? It was still early days. Most people didn't know much about accessibility. I didn't either, but I've always been at the bleeding edge of technology. So I had seen a screen reader and I had read about it. And then one day, my dad, who was in his mid 80s, he couldn't do his banking. He had lost most of, like, over 50%, 60% of his hearing, even more, same with his eyesight. And so getting to the bank was extremely difficult. He couldn't bank on the telephone. And as a web developer, it just felt like going online should have been the solution. And because his bank's website, the colors were inaccessible, I got really upset. So I wrote a blog post proposing a global day of awareness for developers was my initial idea, though obviously it relates to anyone making digital content. And while I was writing it, I thought if I worked really hard, I could maybe turn this into a success. And after I hit enter, I was like, there's no way anything is going to come of this.
Wow.
And to my shock, Jennison Ascension, my other co-founder, read the blog post. He said, it's a great idea. Let's make it happen. And still, there was no reason this should have gone viral the way it has, other than the fact that it impacts a lot more people than we know. And the people that it impacts are extremely passionate about it. And it was the community that built it into something. We didn't have any money. We didn't come in with money. We didn't spend any money. We didn't have any backing. The community picked it up. People thank me all the time. And all I say is, no, thank you, because without people like you, without people like Ed, nothing would come of it.
And this is back in 2012, right? When GAAD was officially founded. I appreciate the story that it was very personal to you and you wanted to do something to help your dad. And now it's spearheaded this movement that is helping millions of people around the world. Ed, what were you doing in 2012?
2012, let's see. I was building and leading the accessibility program at a private analytics company. And I was working on the accessibility of data visualization for people who are blind or visually impaired. And we were pushing the boundaries of that technology back then. And of course, I was tracking GAAD back then. And we were probably one of the early organizations to start hosting internal events to spread the word about accessibility, because that was, 14 years ago.
Yes.
And yeah, it was a different world then. Accessibility was much more of a cult phenomenon I think it's gone mainstream a lot, largely because of Joe and Jennison and the great work they've done.
Amazing. Joe, one thing that you mentioned, I wanted to ask, because you were working on the American Idol website or the American Idol show, right? And so you mentioned that you actually had a contestant, and that was one of the reasons why you started thinking about accessibility as a developer.
Certainly was on my mind. Yeah, absolutely. He's such a nice guy, and his family is so nice. I wound up meeting them at one of those American Idol parties, and I was like, "Are we okay?"
I love that. And I wanted to touch on that because Ed, you were working on something related to, was it databases? And then Joe, you were like in a completely different world, working on for an entertainment type of website. And that just shows like such an incredible relation of how this matters to everyone. Like regardless of what you do. And you mentioned earlier that it's not just for web developers. It's a great point. Anyone who's creating any type of content, it should be accessible if it's online.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
I want to say something funny too, is that Jennison, my co-founder, I'm from Montreal. Jennison is from Montreal. And in terms of database developer, if you know the database that Ed was working on, there's a lot of people that are big fans of it. And I happen to have been a database developer that worked on that database. And when I heard that Ed was heading up accessibility there, I could not have been more excited. So there's so many alignments just out of nowhere. It's a great database. I learned so much about data from it.
That's amazing. Ed, from your experience back then, obviously 2012 through now, right? And your own personal experience with accessibility, why is accessibility so important? I want to ask both of you this question, if you don't mind, Ed, first.
Yeah. There's different ways to talk about disability. There's like the medical definition of disability, and there's a social model of disability. Then there's a third one those are the established models for disability. And there's a third one that I've been working on because I'm simply not happy with the first two.
I love that. Change it.
Yeah. The medical model, I'll give you a story. When I was 10 years old, I was playing baseball. I was playing first base. And long story short, I dropped the ball, dirty infield, and I could not find that ball in the dirt to save my life. And that caused my parents to take me to the doctor, to the experts, and they diagnosed me with a degenerative retinal disease. And they said, "You're going to go blind. We know you're going to go blind. We don't know when. There's nothing we can do about it." And they said, "Good luck."
Wow.
And that's the medical model of disability is, frankly, I'll say this bluntly, you're broken. If we can fix you, we'll fix you. If not, you're on your own. And that just wastes such incredible human talent and ability. So the social model takes a different approach. The social model basically says that, well, people who are blind can't see books that are printed with printed words on a printed page, but they can read Braille and they can read with their ears. And if we create these constructs, these supports, and find alternate ways of presenting information and making content operable, then people who are blind and other types of disabilities can just truly participate, and we can bring their talents to life.
Yes.
And kind of humanity can reap the rewards of all of that creativity. All right. But now this third thing, I'm not satisfied with those two either. I think that this concept of disability is in error. It's deficient in the sense that there is a great number of dimensions where humans vary. Some of us are short, some of us are tall. Some of us can run a mile in 4 minutes. It takes me 12 minutes, whatever. There's all these different dimensions. And if we think about the cognitive dimension, they're infinite. The ways that we differ and the beautiful diversity of humanity is so great. And I want to stop talking about disability and I want to talk about variability. Like, we're just different. And the fact that I cannot see does not mean that I don't have enormous contributions to make. One, two, it also means that because I can't see, I have certain skills that are strong, that I've developed as a result of that. I can give you some examples of those. Just because when you can't see, you start to listen a lot more. You start to pay attention in different ways. You go from being super focused on what's in front of you to being very 360 about what's going on around you. Having that diversity in teams, in organizations, in our family here, my family here at home, in our communities, it saves us. It creates opportunities because I can see things that you can't see, frankly, because you're too focused in using your vision. Just as one example of that. So accessibility is important because it just allows everyone to participate.
Yes, I love this new definition. You have to coin that, and that has to become a standard. Yes, so our different abilities, and super appreciate you sharing your story, how this is so personal to you, and you actually turn that experience into this life's work, really. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Joe, you shared personally, obviously you had a moment where you met someone and impacted you. You wanted to make sure you were doing right by this person, then your own personal experience with your father. But anything else you'd like to add about the importance of accessibility for you?
Yeah, first of all, that answer was genius, Ed.
Yes.
Perfect. I agree with all of it, and it's very well thought out. But what I'll just add to it from a different dimension is the numbers, because a lot of people seem to care about the numbers. The oldest millennial is right now, I believe, 44, certainly 43. The median age of Americans are 39 point something years old. Your vision, like physically, just starts to degrade at 40 years old. That's when you start to need larger font size, more color contrast. It happens so slowly you don't realize it, but you go into a restaurant and the loudness starts to bother you. In your 20s and your 30s, you don't even realize it. And then when you reach my age, in your 50s, you're like, oh my God, this room is terrible. And so the number of people and populations are aging almost everywhere, except for like maybe Africa. The age goes up and up, and people in my generation have had digital content for 3 decades. And we're not going to give up on that digital content. We're taking it with us wherever we go. And if the place that we want to go is not accessible, we're just not going to do it. It's not going to be our first choice. We're going to switch to someone else. And so why would you want to lock out this massive audience that is getting older and have more and more needs? So to me, that's the answer as to why this is important to you. You may not realize that if you're in your 20s and 30s, that what you're building, you can lock people out very easily. For example, I know a lot of people love dark mode, but for me, that makes my eyes really hurt. If you can have both options, that's ideal.
That is such a fair point. Thank you for sharing that. As someone who's very recently started putting things far away from me when I'm trying to read them. And that's a recent development, which is, well, what happened? So things that I definitely did not care about before, I'm starting to play out a lot more prevalent. So how great if instead of, it should be baked into every product, whether it's a preference or a matter of like you need it to be able to better do your job or anything. That's awesome, Joe. And I feel you with dark mode. People hate my presentations because I'm one of those that usually presents on light mode for a reason.
I know especially devs love dark mode, but I can't do it. It hurts.
Yes. There is so much there as to why it's important, why it matters, why it should matter to everyone and not just developers. But if you're a person that's in the world, I can't think of someone who's not consuming content digitally in some capacity, like everyone, like the older people, the younger people. Accessibility is a topic that should matter to you. You've done such incredible work throughout the years, amazing work creating the GAAD pledge. And I want to touch a bit about that. If you could give us a TLDR on what it is that the GAAD pledge is for folks who might have never heard of this. And then I'm sure this was not an easy thing to develop and launch. If you could share some of those sort of challenges and the wins, that would be great.
Yeah. First, let's just start with the impetus for it was I would go in and take a look at a new project, open source project, and I would see the quick starts and the documentation would have inaccessible examples. And that just drove me absolutely crazy. And I'd open up a PR and say, hey, can you fix this? And when that PR does not get closed, it made me pretty mad. I get it with open source. It's a task. It's one of those tasks, thankless jobs. But on the other hand, when you're talking about the real big major ones, they do have money behind it. And there's no excuse for not having accessibility. And I thought we should really have some of the major projects go and take the pledge. And so I called up my friend, Mike Shabanik, who headed up accessibility at Facebook then, now Meta. And I said, hey, Mike, I want to do this GAAD pledge thing. How about Facebook is the first one to take the pledge and does it for React Native? He spoiled me because he just said, oh, great idea. Let's do it.
Wow.
That was insane. It was like one of the most important projects you could get. And we got it immediately. And then they re-upped the next year as well. And they put significant resources into improving the accessibility of that project. And my goal was to have more of these projects take the lead and then show the way. But then, and we had other great pledges. So we had Ember take the pledge. We had Drupal take the pledge. Intel took the pledge for an AI project, and Joomla. And I'm really grateful to all of these folks. But I would say that it wasn't as easy as the first time around because you needed to get a whole group of people to agree. So it impacted the organizations internally. And the ones that took the pledge were really very motivated by it. And I'm grateful. But then we had COVID come out, and then we had a lot of people moving around. And so sometimes you might have a champion internally, and when the champion leaves, it can impact the ongoing maintenance. So there were challenges, since you asked about that. But the back of my mind, I always thought GitHub was the place. To me, it's the social media for developers. Yes, designers, others doing digital products, but really core for developers. And that's where culture lives. And we believe at the GAAD Foundation, it's all about culture. If you're designing something that's inaccessible and culturally it's not acceptable to do that, it's not acceptable to hand over a design that's inaccessible, that's a change that requires no regulation from the government. You don't need to go to a CFO and say, can you fund me to make sure that I'm good at my craft? The culture is where the biggest accessibility changes can happen. And so it's always my dream for GitHub to take the pledge and to break it. This is the one. This is the last pledge, and that's where we are. And so I just called Ed and I'm like, can we do this? Can we have GitHub take the pledge and make it the last pledge and really bake in that anybody that opens a new open source project should bake in accessibility right from the beginning, nudge them in the right direction? And Ed said yes. That was the big one for me.
Oh my gosh, it's the right thing to do for one, but you're so correct. That is changing culture for developers and changing culture for the way that we build products regardless. And GitHub is the home for open source. So this should be the place. So Ed, where are we at? What's happening?
We're at the end, but we're also at the beginning.
Okay.
View this as an S curve where, Joe and Jennison and the GAAD Foundation, they launched this and had those initial few projects. At this point, I think the movement that is accessibility and open source is just starting to gain momentum, and that we're joining all those existing efforts. GitHub is. And what's key about this is that we're also, as we go, we're going to bring in other individuals and maintainers and organizations, whether they be industry, academia, government, to chip in and join this movement and keep this snowball going down the hill and growing in its end. So we have taken a pledge,
yes,
and we worked out 3 goals for our pledge. So let me tell you about the first goal is to empower people with disabilities to contribute to open source. Okay. And the reason this is critical, you touched on this earlier. You said you could think of anyone who doesn't use digital content in some way. And that's true because technology has become ubiquitous. And if you're going to get a degree, if you're going to learn, whether it be formal or informal, you're going to use technology. If you're going to get a job, you're going to apply online, you're probably going to use online tools, right? In some way, shape, or form. You're going to sign up for your 4K or your healthcare. All that's going to happen online. If you're going to socialize, if you're going to build a network, if you're going to participate in civic discourse, it all happens with technology today. And we have a saying in the disability community, and that saying is, it's a mantra: nothing about us without us, nothing about us without us. And what that means is, if there's a decision that's going to impact people with disabilities, we want to be a part of it. We want to contribute to it as creators of it. And frankly, the world runs on open source, more so than proprietary code. We're seeing more and more studies that come out that show that. And it's just absolutely essential that people with disabilities get to jump in and not only be part of the creation process, but also realize the benefits of that process, of the learning and the self-actualization and the skills that create employment opportunities. There's just so many great things about contributing to open source, or just even just creating, being a maker. It's got to admit, it's pretty darn fun. I think that's why we all got into this, right? Just because we just loved creating things. We love building. There's 1.3 billion people with disabilities, 1.3 billion people who should have the opportunity to jump in and be a part of this thing, open source.
So we're taking the pledge. Yay, hooray for GitHub and great work, Ed.
So we want to increase the amount of open source assistive technologies that are available. Open source assistive technologies are beautiful because, one, anybody can jump in and create them. We can build on them and build the communities to make them better. They're free for people to use. And free is key for people with disabilities because, and this is where you got to use a systems approach here, right? And look at the whole system, because there are so many barriers to education. There are so many barriers to employment. As a general rule, people with disabilities have less money than people without. So in order to climb out of this vicious cycle that's caused by a lack of access, having free access to screen readers and different types of assistive technologies is absolutely key. So that's an important part of making it so that people with disabilities can contribute to open source, who can be a part of this, right? And then lastly, and this is the real kind of crowning achievement here, I think, would be to increase the accessibility of our mainstream open source projects, the ones where all the websites and the applications are built on top of these projects, where they leverage these projects in the stack or in the Kubernetes, the cloud, all these Docker, all these kinds of things. They need to be accessible so that people with disabilities could help deploy them as consumers of the technology in IT roles. They need to be accessible to their end users if they have a UI. React Native would be a great example of that. Yeah, so we got lastly, the tools and the READMEs and the communities where these open source technologies are created, they need to be accessible so that people with disabilities can actually contribute. So those are our top 3 goals.
That's amazing. What do you think about that, Joe?
That's an incredible list that is going to take a lot of work.
Very ambitious, yes.
Yeah, this is the beginning. I think you said that earlier. This is the beginning of something big, and we need people to get involved. This is not something that will happen by itself. We already obviously have lots of good people that are supporting the mission. The GitHub team is really top notch, but we'd love to see the general public get involved.
Humongous goal. Ed, how in the world are we planning to achieve that? How are we thinking about getting to this goal?
Yeah, the good news is that it's not like we're starting from scratch. There are just some really great things going on already in open source. I don't think we've taken a hard look at how to amplify and spread that goodness from one project to another. I think that's part of what we can do here. But there's basically 3 strategies we're looking at here. The first one, GitHub, we've been working on the accessibility of our platform for a good solid 3+ years. And in fact, over the last 3 years, we've resolved more than 4,400 accessibility issues in our platform. We're doing our part within the walls of GitHub. And there's more that we can do. We can add some of these nudges for open source creating repositories and helping maintainers just do accessibility better by default. So the first strategy is GitHub. We've been working on this for a long time. We're going to continue to do that. The second one is building these partnerships. The partnerships start with the GAAD Foundation. And then from there, we're going out to industry. The OSPOs, open source program offices, are a great opportunity, I think, to strike up some of those partnerships and just recognize our shared interest in accessibility, just like we have a shared interest in the security of open source software. Same thing. We have an interest in the accessibility of it. Gosh, the folks that work on security here at GitHub are so great. Kevin Crosby and others, they've been helping us. They've been very instrumental in helping us form up some of these possibilities with the pledge. And then beyond that, though, in academia, there's all kinds of great research going on there. Governments, they have a huge vested interest in open source and accessibility, especially with some of the legislation that's happening around the world. And then perhaps most importantly are the disability community themselves. And there's disability advocacy organizations that represent different types of disabilities. We're very eager to engage with those organizations and create those partnerships and opportunity for them to learn about open source. And then for people that work in open source to learn from these kind of disability specialists, if you might call it that. And then the last strategy. So first, GitHub, we have work to do internally. 2, we're going to build partnerships to bring others into this snowball and help accelerate and make it larger as we get on the hill. And then 3rd, the people who make open source work, who really are at the heart of open source, the maintainers and the contributors. And it's really about supporting them, meeting them where they are, understanding where the current successes are and where some of the challenges are, and then figuring out how do we apply resources in order to help those maintainers incorporate accessibility and just take the next step. Because the one thing I've learned, I've been working on accessibility for 20 years, it's about progress, not perfection. And it's never going to be perfect. Making progress every day, every week, every quarter, every project. That's how we just keep getting better.
Thank you so much, Ed. And that sounds like a really good strategy, this three-pronged strategy to get there. Joe, I'd love to just go back to you for a moment, because I feel like maybe a lot of folks who are watching this right now might be in the situation where you were when you were working for a show, for a website, and you're thinking, how could we make sure that we're actually doing the right thing by this contestant? So even if your company does not have a product that you might think it might affect someone that is differently able, the power of one person just making the right thing happen and doing the right thing. So for folks that are watching and maybe they're individual contributors, maybe they're not in that managerial or the larger partnership chain where they can, maybe not even part of the OSPO office, but I don't know if you could just share a bit about, like, from that, I'm an engineer in this team and I really think I should be doing the right thing. Any advice that you could give those folks?
Yeah, if you're on the developer side, one interesting angle that I noticed is that the accessibility industry is different than the developers. And the accessibility industry, they speak WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And developers are not really interested in learning about like standards. They don't want to go read a spec in order to develop. They want to actually sit and understand how to code accessibly. And one resource that I think will speak to them considerably is the Magenta Ally, which was created by my friend Charlie Triplett, who wrote the book on accessibility, which I thought was a pretty cute title. And he helped T-Mobile build Magenta Ally as this open source project where he will show you, he's got you how to test a website for accessibility. It shows you video of assistive technology, and it lets you use a gherkin in order to define, is it the success criteria? Essentially, it gives you a sample code, right? So instead of having you go to the W3C, look up some jargon that you don't understand and don't care about, it says, okay, here's a component. Look at this component. Here is some code of how you implement the component accessibly. And now you have an example. And from that example, you can go forward. It shows you videos of people with assistive technology using it, and then tells you step by step how to test. That is what you really need as a developer. So that's a fantastic resource. He left T-Mobile and forked that under Atomic Ally. So that's another place that you can look up, atomica11y.com. And personally, I use DQ University, which is very cheap, relatively speaking, is, I don't know, $150 or something. And I just took all of these courses. And as a developer, that more spoke to me than some other resources. Again, like, it's all about WCAG versus like really understanding the fundamentals from a different angle.
Super interesting. I think it's an accessibility acceptance criteria. So that's it.
Acceptance criteria.
Okay.
That was the word.
That's it. No, but this is such an incredible resource, because you're right. Developers, they want to just hone in and sit down. And if you show me how to do it so that I'm doing it right, like, I don't need to understand, maybe have the full breadth of why things should be at this particular color, or just teach me how to create it accessible from the get-go. And it sounds like that's what this accessibility acceptance criteria tends to do.
So again, it's Magenta Ally A11Y on that website, Atomic Ally as well, and check them both out.
Amazing work. So if you're watching this stream and you don't know how to get started, and maybe in your company there isn't an accessibility champion or a program to make sure that your product is accessible, you can start there. Take a look there and you become that champion for your product. Why not? Okay, so we're a maintainer month. And like you said, the essence of everything that we do, those giants whose shoulders we sit upon on these incredible projects that we all depend on, maintainers and contributors. So for both of you, starting with Ed, what can we do? How can we get involved as maintainers and contributors into supporting GitHub's GAAD pledge, and then, of course, supporting GAAD in general?
Yeah. So we're in the process right now of framing up an open source accessibility summit. The goal is to bring together maintainers and contributors from the open source community and people from the disability communities and accessibility experts, and also then cross-cutting across industry and academia, and bringing people together into a room to start sharing, learning and sharing with each other, and also to start to map out a roadmap for how we continue to improve the accessibility of open source as a whole. And hopefully from that roadmap will contain lots of projects that we can distribute and we can start to open source and contribute to. Hopefully organizations like the GAAD Foundation or NGOs or accessibility advocacy organizations, they can start to write grants or chip in with funding, or OSPOs from industry can say, yeah, we rely on project X and we can chip in here. And hopefully we can just create that, essentially a backlog of high impact activities that we can tackle going forward to accelerate this movement.
That's amazing news. Okay, Joe, what about you from your perspective? How can folks get involved and beyond, because Global Accessibility Awareness Day, it's a day, right? But it's beyond the day. Maintainers and contributors get involved to support the GAAD Foundation.
First, just in terms of accessibility and supporting the ethos of the pledge, if you're a contributor, first on your own project, try and do some accessibility testing. And it's even as easy as going in on the GitHub page itself, clicking on that little Copilot button, and then start talking to it about the repo and saying, how accessible is this repo? Can we improve it make it more accessible? It is extremely easy, and it will even help you write the code. And then GitHub makes it so easy. You just sit there, you edit it, and then you submit the PR right there. It'll fork it for you, a few buttons, and you're done. It's never been easier to get involved. Go into any project you're interested in, or just randomly, if you hear that a project is starting to trend, go in and take a look at the quick start and see if there are any accessibility issues. Look at the documentation and then add in what you think should be better in terms of accessibility, and make it easy on the maintainer by issuing a really good PR. And then if you're a maintainer, pay attention to accessibility. First of all, create standards. What standard are you developing to? What kind of testing is it that you're requiring? Setting up linting for accessibility is something that's always a good idea. So the maintainer, they always have so much work to do, but with a little bit of upfront effort in terms of accessibility, it saves you a lot of time later because you don't have to deal with the technical debt. So that's in terms of the GAAD pledge and just accessibility in general. In terms of GAAD, our website is accessibility.day, and the foundation's website is GAAD.foundation. And you can see a list of events we do pretty often with GitHub, actually, and you can participate. If you've got a project and you want to win a GAADis because you are bringing people with disabilities into your project and making it part of the culture of your project, we would like you to nominate yourself for a GAADis. And those are given out at GitHub headquarters. It's going to be the second time now that it's happening at GitHub. So thank you to Ed for setting that up. And we'll get to meet you in person.
Yeah, the GAADis are coming up in November, I think. I can't remember the exact date. They're typically in November. But Joe, you got to explain, the GAADis.
This sounds like the Oscars of accessibility. Folks are doing great work for accessibility.
It really is. So I had been a part of the TV Academy, and I invited to our board of directors who served for a year or so, who was a governess for the Emmys. And I was just sitting there, I was looking at her, and I was like, we should do a GAADis where we give out awards to organizations that really imbue accessibility into the core of what they do. And the most important thing that we care about is that people with disabilities, we're testing it. We're involved in the testing. We're involved in the creation. Nothing about us without us, as Ed said. That's really the core. Anybody doing development, a cool project is welcome to participate, to be nominated. And we give them out. So this is going to be the third year. Yeah.
Sounds like a party. What a treat. I love it. I love it. Okay, folks. So if you already know a project that's doing a really good job and you want to go ahead and nominate it, we'll share the link to that so that you can go party at the GAADis. I love it. That is amazing. Thank you both so much for taking the time to have this conversation. I've learned a ton today. I'm super hopeful. Ed, you have so much work to do. Joe, you mentioned something that I wanted to highlight because you are right. In the era of Copilot, there is no excuse. you can go right now and use Copilot free and ask it, how can you make your XYZ more accessible? And it will give you the answer. It will give you the code. If you want to edit those LinkedIn rules to include accessibility as a step check process before you merge in a pull request, the same way we think about security, we should be thinking about accessibility. So no excuses. Copilot can do it for you.
Yeah, you don't even have to like use it through the VS Code. Literally, you're on GitHub. There's an icon there. You push the icon and you chat with Copilot about the repo. Literally could not be easier.
Absolutely. I cannot wait to see people who are starting to do that. Listen, if you're watching this and you decided to give it a try and then you made some improvements to your site based on those recommendations, please let me know. This is what we need AI for. And I'll be the champion of getting you, not a GAADi, because I don't have that, but I might get you something cool.
So,
okay. Anything else that either of you want to add? This has been such a fun conversation. Thank you both so much.
Listen, thank you for creating the space for this conversation. I just love the format and the vibe of this.
Oh, thank you, Ed. That's too kind. I appreciate it.
yeah, thank you so much. And also for supporting accessibility. It's the individuals that make the difference. It's really people like you that come in and say, I want to do a show about this. I want to grow the awareness, but we couldn't do it without you. So thank you so much.
My goodness. Thank you both for all the work you do. So how can we connect with you online? Joe, I believe you're Joe Devon everywhere, right?
Yeah. At Joe Devon everywhere.
Okay. And Ed will be LinkedIn, will be the best place to connect with you.
I'm Ed Summers, NC, like EDSUMMERS NC, like North Carolina, all one word there. LinkedIn and Twitter are my primaries. LinkedIn is my best.
Okay, excellent. I'll be sure to add those handles to the show notes so folks can go ahead and give you a follow. And then, of course, to cite all of the amazing resources that you've given us today. So if you're watching this and you are ready to leave your mark and make sure that you're creating thoughtfully, because it matters to every single person, I'm excited for you. Lots of good resources and use Copilot to do it. Let me know. I'll send you a gift. Like, I'm so excited to see if something that's come from that. I super appreciate your time here, folks. Don't forget, go ahead and give them a follow via social, via LinkedIn, and please check out the GAAD Foundation, check out the GAAD.day website and see how you too can leave your impact in this very important and important to you issue. So thank you both. I appreciate you. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.